righty.
All right. Have a call target, please. Since we don't have a secretary.
Oh, what am I supposed to do?
Okay.
Oh, wait, that's me. Wait a minute. Take a roll call?
Yeah, let me have a roll call.
All right, Dr. Esner?
Here.
Dr. Byer?
Here.
Director Mueller?
Here.
Director Faulkner?
Here.
Director Hudson?
Here.
Vice President Boswell? Here. And President Cuneo?
Here. We pledge allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, especially on such a beautiful night. We have a quorum. There are no public comments. Would someone like to make a motion for the approval of the agenda, please?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Superintendent report. First was strategic and comprehensive school improvement plan, first quarter updates.
I know you guys have missed me, right?
Yeah.
We're getting into the season of all of your
Right.
reports.
Good evening, Dr. Cuneo, Vice President Patra, Board of Directors, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Molly Bolton. I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. And tonight, my first presentation is the Strategic and Comprehensive School Improvement Plan and our first quarter updates. Just to let you know, the PowerPoint that I'll be presenting tonight is a little bit different than the one you have in front of you. We were able to add our KPI dashboard. We weren't sure if it was going to be ready before the board meeting, but it was. And so we have added a few slides at the end, which I will make sure that they're emailed to you. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this presentation is the update on strategic and CSIP plans and our first quarter reports. Just a quick reminder, this is the very first quarter of our 5-year plan. Next slide, please. You may remember this graphic that highlights the difference between the strategic plan and the comprehensive school improvement plan, or CSIP plan. Remember that strategic plan focuses on the district as a whole, which includes the operational side as well as the instructional side, where the comprehensive school improvement plan focuses more in on the instructional side and the impact that it has on the students. Slide, please. So first I'll report out on our strategic plan progress. Next slide. Our first strategy and goal is implementing effective strategic database systems that efficiently and equitably support instruction and operations. The big focus of these two strategies we combine together, and the big focus with that, we are looking at data sharing with our partner districts. So we have a couple of opportunities that we're taking advantage of right now. We do have a pilot program that we're doing with Panorama on their Success platform. We are partnering with Melville School District, who is a Panorama user, and Hancock Place, which is not a Panorama user. And we are beginning to data share between the districts to see if this might be a viable option. The other exciting piece is we are part of a grant from MoreNet, and they got a grant from EdFi. And we are working on a prototype with them, and we are inviting 6 of our partner districts to partner with us for a prototype that we developed through the SRS process. And so we've been in the very beginning stages with working with them. They're working with a platform called Elevate, and so we've begun work with that. Another big accomplishment that this team has begun is data governance. Daily, we come upon situations where we see the need for data governance to ensure that the data that we're using is reliable and valid and easily accessible. And so this team has a very, very big job. The nice thing was this was a project team previous to becoming a strategy team, so we're a little bit farther along on this work than some of our other teams. Also with this team, the KPI dashboard, which you'll get a little bit of exposure to this evening, has also been a part of their work. Next slide, please. Strategic goal 2 is optimizing our resources to equitably support students to meet their greatest potential. We have two strategies under this. One is a short-lived strategy, if you will, and the other is more long-term. The first strategy is identifying through the different divisions the resources that each division uses to meet their goals. And that work is getting ready to wrap up. Once that work is completed, it will be shared with 2.2. And they will be developing that process to ensure that we're using resources efficiently and there's equitable access to those resources. Next slide, please. Our strategic goal 3 is all about communication, so looking for that two-way communication and how we can improve those relationships across stakeholder groups. We have 3 strategies that fall under this. The first one is really about our partnerships. And we do have a new position that was just filled at the end of November. This is a position that was vacated by Sally Devani, and our new person just started 2 weeks ago. And so we'll be getting up to speed on this. You can see this one is a little bit more in the beginning phases, working on their theory of change and understanding staffing and what we have going on there. Our second team is family engagement. And this, again, is a team that we've had for a while, moving forward. And so their work now is really focused in on what kind of family engagement do we see in the partner districts. So gathering some baseline information for that. The third strategy is about communication systems among departments, and that is led by our communications executive director. And a couple things that have been accomplished this first quarter is the central office newsletter to let folks know events that are happening and work that's happening across central office. And then we have adopted a new newsletter platform so we can get a better handle on the analytics for how folks are accessing that information. Slide, please. So the next part of the presentation is about our CSIP plan updates. So again, remember those are more student-focused. So our first goal is proactively planning for student success. Our first strategy with that is a strategy that's been around for a while, and that is our positive post-secondary outcomes. And so a lot of that work has been around what do we consider a good life. That's one of the things when we talk about students working to their potential and things like that, with that conversation comes into play. So just really kind of honing in on what does that mean. And then also looking at what SSD would consider positive post-secondary outcomes. We know the state has a very narrow definition when we look at our population of students. So they just brought a draft to our leadership team about some other possibilities to consider for positive post-secondary outcomes. And then it'll be working with our partner districts to begin to collect that data. 1.2 is improving connection between student data and those research-based factors. Again, this is a brand new team, so they are in the beginning phases of working on their theory of change and how they're going to scope their work. The next one also is a newer CSIP strategy, and that is collaboratively planning with partners. And again, they're in that same place where they're working through their theory of change, defining their scope, and reviewing the SRS process. Slide, please. Goal 2 is aligning and coordinating our decision-making to provide the student supports that are consistent with our mission. And 2.1 is all about developing the philosophy, the common philosophy that we'll have for our district. And right now they are working on figuring out what current state is as far as the continuum of services offered across the county. And we'll be collecting and organizing that data. 2.2 is one that's been around for a while. It's our evidence-based practices. And so finalizing their theory of change, their design principles, and reviewing data from last school year to kind of inform practices where we'll move forward. Next slide, please. Goal 3 is about being responsive to our highly mobile students, and that team is working on identifying data that we'd like to collect from our partner districts, and then those data collection strategies, so that we can start to analyze that data and determine the next steps moving forward. Next slide, please. And this is the part that's been added to your PowerPoint, so you probably will not see it in your slides there. I had some placeholders in there, but this is about our key performance indicators dashboard. Okay? So this was identified during our strategic planning process, and we really wanted to monitor key performance indicators on how we were doing in the district. And so with this, we're looking at the data of those key performance indicators that were identified through the strategic plan process to really help us make decisions. And so eventually, once we begin gathering this data, we'll be able to see trends across the year over multiple years. So we will be able to track our progress in a very systematic way. Slide, please. So just a quick, what is a key performance indicator? So it's those things that tell us how we're doing with our goals. So how are we meeting our goals? We're going to have two different reports and be able to look at data in two different ways. The first being quarterly reports. And so that will tell us what's happening currently and then allow us to analyze that data and make changes so that when we get to the end of the year, we'll be closer to goals that we have set. And then the second measure will be the balanced scorecard. And so that is really an overview of our performance indicators and how we've done over the year. We will also have a third one, which will be our trends, which will show what we're hoping to show is over a 3-year time span, how has our data changed. Slide, please. The dashboard that has been developed is we are using a Power BI, which is a Microsoft product in our Microsoft suite. And folks have to do that. So once we get the dashboard fully functional, we'll be able to share that out even on our public website. This is just a small snippet. As I said, we've just put first quarter data in there, so there's not a lot of data in there for us to see. But we will do a work study with you guys where we can actually dig into the data. We just like to wait until we have a little bit more data in there so we can really start seeing some implications of that data. So this is just a few examples of the data that we're tracking. So one of the pieces of data is our least restrictive environment. So what percentage of our students are in the different categories. And then a couple others are how our students are progressing on their goals, and we've broken that down into reading, math, and emotional. We'll also be looking at things like their assessment scores for FastBridge for our partner districts and Star and iReady for our schools. We're looking at things like what bus rides, our transportation, like how many students are on the bus longer than an hour at a time. And so those are just a few things. Some next steps we'll be taking are on the next slide. So basically, we've got this dashboard. We'll be soliciting some feedback from our stakeholders, which you guys will be included in that as part of our stakeholder group. We'll be documenting some of those measurements. Also, really kind of thinking about what are our targets. Some of our measurements already have established targets when we look at like our assessment scores for national norms and things along that line. Other targets, for example, kids riding on the bus, may not have targets yet, and so we're going to need to determine what is an appropriate target. We'll also be refining our process for data review and the decision-making that will be happening around our KPIs, and then providing that initial training, which would happen with you guys in a work session, and then build out the remaining key performance indicators in our dashboard, and then lastly, trying to figure out how to automatize those. Right now, many of our measures are pretty labor-intensive to get the data in the system, and so looking for ways to automatize that so it's not as labor-intensive, but we still have the information that we need. Next slide. I also would like to give a couple of shout-outs. Marcus Shane and John Gabriel are both part of our technology department, and they have been very instrumental in helping us get this idea, this dream, if you will, off and running. So I just want to give a couple of shout-outs to them. I'll now open it up for questions.
See, Wendy has.
She's doing a shout-out.
Oh. Questions, anyway?
I have a question. Theory of change, could you define that or explain that a little bit more?
Absolutely, absolutely. So with our theory of change, that's where we've looked at some of the, when we did our research and our data review, we identified some areas that we wanted to dig deeper into. And then we look at our short-term measures, our long-term measures, and what we want that change or impact to be. And so that is part, so then those short-term measures kind of become our milestones, our action steps and milestones, and then it moves to the impact that we want to see, which would be our measurements.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Same question.
Yeah, same question. All right, great.
I got a couple.
Okay.
First of all, page 3. Showing us, governing council.
Yeah.
Can we keep this and show this every year?
Absolutely.
This is probably the
I
cleanest
knew-
slide that I've
I know
ever
that was
seen
your flavor.
and
Same
shows
way.
things. I mean, it was so interesting because there were no questions on the differences after you showed this slide.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, let me ask a couple of questions. Same comment on that slide, and this was visible in the online presentation we just saw, but it's not visible on this slide, and it wasn't the one the governing council saw. The top part, where it actually tells you which is cut off, which makes this more into like a quiz of, do you know which is which? So, just for anybody who's using this.
Yeah, you're right.
It was visible.
And it wasn't the governing council. The second thing I have on this is under page 9. I'd be interested when defining post-school outcomes and determining predictors. I'd be interested in what our students say. You said that, and I'm quite sure that our students would be different than what Desi is saying. But sometime, just even throw it in the Friday memo, just to give some examples. I'd be curious to what they're saying, what they consider to be good life predictors.
Absolutely. We can get that, take all the feedback.
Thank you. Any other questions?
A couple. First of all, as you're getting that stakeholder feedback, I don't know if there's a way to check in with families a year after they,
So we do have to do, DESI requires us to do 90-day, 180-day follow-ups. So we are doing those follow-up conversations in our partner districts as well.
I'm especially curious about the students who, participate in SSD programs to age 21 and what their experiences are.
And we do collect that data if they're in our VSP program.
Yeah. And my other question was about one of the KPI dashboard slides, the one that was showing examples of data. Were those real examples of
Those
data?
are.
So I was curious about the numbers. There's a way to pull it back up again, but the examples were the percentage of students who were in the classroom, the regular classroom, certain percentages of the time. It looked like the end numbers. I feel like a person who was here on the board before me. Talk about.
So you will
He was on your
see
speed.
those, you will be able to see those as you drill down into the dashboard.
So for example, on the third item, percent of students in the regular class, less than 40% of the time. The end there looks like it's 1,301.
That is not the end, no,
Oh,
that
okay.
is the DESI code.
Got it, okay. I was
Yeah.
wondering why we have
That's
1,300
the
students.
DESI code.
Gotcha.
Right?
Thank you for, yeah.
Yes. No problem. That just helps us as we're pulling data, to pull it with those codes, so that we're keeping our data consistent with what DESI records.
And then the other question is, there's obviously a group of students missing here. When we look at the percentages, right, the 65 plus 20 plus 7. And do we know where those students are?
So, the top one is 100% to 79%.
Gotcha.
It's a 79 to 40, and then 40 or less.
Yes,
Then you have the POS, the separate placements.
and those are a different group of kids.
That is a different group of kids, yes.
Still not adding up to 100, but
Well, the 100% would go to, it's 70% to, 79% to 100% of the time they're in special education. It's the percentage of time they're spending in special education.
yeah, I'm following you. I think we're,
Regular education.
I think you're talking about the value.
the value column.
Oh, over on the side.
Yeah, so in other words, we're accounting for roughly 85%
I see what you're saying.
of the kids.
Yes. So, Yeah, we have, also our homebound and SNAP students.
Okay, and those are a significant enough portion to,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
And we'll dig deeper into that when we get into the work study. And again, this was our initial attempt, and so we'd like to get a little bit more data in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right, our second report is on the MSIP program monitoring. Do we ever let you sit down?
I'll just sit down after this one. All right, so, good evening, Dr. Cuneo, Vice President Coptrop, Board of Directors, Dr. Keenan. My name is Molly Bolton. I'm the Executive Director of CT Learning. And with me tonight, I do have Dr. Matt Trevor, who is our Evaluation and Research Administrator. Next slide, please. So this report is all about our MSIP monitoring reports. So we're fulfilling the DESE MSIP requirement for program evaluation and monitoring. Also, this informs our stakeholders of how we're doing with our programs on an ongoing basis. And it also helps us to ensure that we're looking at our goals, creating action plans for continuous improvement. The monitoring reports that we are reviewing this evening are Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA, our Career and Technical Education, or CTE, our Early Childhood Special Education Program, our Facilities and Grounds, Homebound Services, Purchase of Services, and our Special Non-Public Access Program, or SNAP. Turn it over to Dr. Trump.
Good evening. I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of the 7 reports that were presented tonight. So this is a slide that's been in this presentation. It just gives, serves as sort of a key for information that is in the summary table in each one of the reports. The data that is presented is color-coded. So if a result falls below the established target, it's color-coded orange. If it falls below, it's color-coded blue. There's also directional arrows to reflect the trend. Next slide. So the first program in this group is Applied Behavioral Analysis, or ABA. This program is monitored with 5 distinct indicators. So the first indicator is a student progress indicator. It's based on the ABA, what they call an outcome grid. The outcome grid has actually been updated pretty substantially for 2022-23. So they'll be using new criteria this year moving forward. The 4 subsequent measures are all survey measures. 2 of them are targeted towards staff and 2 are targeted towards families. They look at satisfaction among those who collaborate with ABA, as well as perceptions around whether the skills taught through ABA are generalized into other settings. Next slide. Career technical education is monitored via 4 indicators. The first one is called the CTE Certificate of Attainment. This is actually a brand new indicator that's available. It is based on 7 distinct criteria of achievement, so it's pretty challenging for students to earn. At this point, we have a pretty small percentage of students who are earning it, but it's expected to grow over time. The second indicator is the percent of graduates who are placed after they graduate high school in an occupation related to their program of study or post-secondary education related to it. Actually saw a pretty significant increase in that in 2022. Third metric is called the National Career Readiness Certificate Attainment. This is based on what's called the Work Keys Assessment, which is a academic assessment that focuses on applied skills. The final metric there is 2-year student retention, or in other words, the percentage of students who begin a 2-year program that ultimately complete that program. The percentage there has dipped a little bit during and subsequent to COVID, but improving that has been embedded in building improvement plans. Early childhood special education has 2 indicators in this report. The first one is what is referred to as a common assessment. So these are assessments that were developed internally by our ECSE staff. For this report, we focus on literacy as well as social emotional development. The result for literacy was pretty strong this year. The ECFC program and administrators have worked through a couple of iterations over the last couple of years around what is the best way to collect these types of data that are both convenient for staff and provide administrators with analytic information that they can use. The second indicator is the results of the district-wide IEP survey. So this is based on an overall impression item that is isolated to students in early childhood. Results on that have been very strong over recent years. Facilities and grounds has 4 measures. The first one is an efficiency-related measure, looking at the percentage of work orders completed within 5 days. The next 3 are survey-related measures, which served as sort of a stopgap this year as we transition from one type of staff assessment to another. So moving forward, we will use an item from the district staff engagement survey to measure satisfaction with physical conditions. So that building condition result, I think, was a little bit surprising to our facilities team, but it's something that they can further study and work on. Next slide. So our Homebound Services program serves students who are unable to access services in the school setting. The report focuses on 3 indicators, the first of which is a process effectiveness metric. So how quickly, basically, they're establishing services for students when they're referred to Homebound. The results on that metric have been very strong over the years. The second 2 indicators for this program are both survey-related. So an aggregate measure of satisfaction that families have with Homebound, as well as satisfaction among other stakeholders for the program, such as our teachers and administrators and partner district teachers. Purchase of service is monitored with 5 distinct measures. The first one is an attendance measure called 90/90. So roughly that is the proportion of students who are attending 90% of the time. I will point out that that 2021 result was based on alternative attendance tracking during COVID, so it's not really comparable to the results from other years. Their second indicator is the proportion of students who, once in a purchase of service placement, then transition back to a less restrictive placement. The final 3 metrics in this report, the first one assesses growth as measured by a brief social emotional behavioral instrument, whereas the 4th and 5th are based on growth as measured through the STAR assessment, which is also given to students in our SSD schools. So for those last 3, with respect to the target, we're looking at the extent to which students attending POS are achieving results that are relatively comparable to those for students who are attending our other SSD schools. Next slide, please. So finally, the Special Non-Public Access Program, SNAP, like Homebound, is actually a new program to our monitoring calendar, so we've never monitored them before, so this is the initial report. They have 3 metrics. The first one relates to a consultation agreement that they're required by TESI to complete every year. All of the non-public schools are required to sign off on this agreement. That has been met each of the last 3 years. Their second measure is a stakeholder satisfaction survey. It has not been administered for the last 3 years, but a revision of that is in process, and it will be administered again in 2022-23. Their final indicator is the initial evaluation eligibility rate for SNAP. So the SNAP program has its own team of school psychologists who conduct evaluations. So this was chosen as an indicator because if it starts to dip too much, that can be a sign that more work is needed with our SNAP partners to ensure that the special education referrals coming from non-public schools are appropriate and warranted. Next slide. We'll take questions at this time.
Questions, anyone?
I've got a couple. First, on the Homebound Services, you said the target was 4.5. Is that out of 5?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the survey, response choices run from a value of 1, which is the least desirable response, to 5, which is the most desirable.
Just wanted to make sure it wasn't 10.
Sure.
And then on the next slide, for the purchase of service, with the start reading and math, this, I guess this is more general question, test. For example, my son, who goes to New Warner, he's in 10th grade, but he's a 5th grade level academically. When they take those tests, are they always measuring against your biological year, the 10th grade year? Or are they like, okay, this kid is an established 5th grade level, so we would do a 5th grade test?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Those tests are actually what you call adapted. So they're taken on a computer, and based on your first performance on maybe the first couple of items that you take, it will cater your path through that assessment and give you items that are in that sort of proximal zone for the individual student.
Because my question was, some of these students who might be purchased a service may be the same age, but might even be 3rd grade, 2nd grade, math, and it's almost not fair to compare them to, to other students, because maybe, and hopefully, we want to see the improvement, but to drastically go 7th grade in 1 year,
Yeah. There's some fancy statistical algorithms that assign them a score based on the items they take that can relate their performance to students at a similar grade.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Thank you for the report. On the career and technical education, when this is a 2-year student extension, we see between 22 and 20 almost a 10% decline in reference to students that are attempting apparently to take those particular courses. Is that based upon just the fact that students are still trying to get back into the educational mindset, or is it something different that is causing not to have the same interest?
Yeah, so that refers to whether they stuck it out through the entirety of the program. My understanding that result and that decreases, and Kevin could speak to it, but is in part attributable to the fact that after SSD schools went back in person following COVID, there was a decline in student potential.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. So because the 22 graduating class was with us as a junior in the 2021 school year, we saw a pretty substantial drop when North and South Tech came back to in-person in January, when many of our partner districts were still virtual at that point, especially in the north area, Hazelwood, Ferguson, Florissant. And so we had students who chose to, as opposed to trying to juggle half in-person, half virtual, stay virtual at their home high school entirely. And so we saw a pretty significant drop. So if you look at that 2-year retention bell curve, much of the drops happened in the junior year. Our senior year looks more like a typical senior year. But the junior year, because of the COVID component of it, with juggling in-person and virtual, and we also had schools that came back to in-person and then went back to virtual and then came back in person again. We had students chose to drop because it was too difficult balancing 2 different schools at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the purchase of service monitoring report, and I realize that one of these questions, which has to do with the attendance rates, is in reference to the annual loan school. I realize we only have 3 students there, so if this is information that has to do with private student information, that's okay to answer in the executive session, but the attendance rates at that school were substantially below those of the other schools. Curious if you guys have any comments on that. This is in the numbers here for the list.
So I think one part of that is the fact that there was so few students that initial year. So like for this year, the enrollment is only 2.
Yeah.
So in that case, you could have, I'm not sure what the enrollment was last year, but you could have 2 or 3 students not quite at that 90%, and you would only have a 23% result.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have data for the other years. Yeah.
It must be.
So that was a new program. What happened is soon after we started our partnership with them, they had some structural damage.
Okay.
The high school students were able to go on virtual, the elementary were in person. It was very hard to keep the high schoolers on a virtual program. That resulted in the low attendance.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? I got a couple, next time we do this, oh, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, you touched on facilities and grounds, the low percentages for building conditions and cleanliness. How, I know you mentioned something, but how are we addressing that?
So that is something that we have monitored throughout the transition. Last year, we were with a different company. We went out to bid. We're now with this new company. We've had a little bit of transition with the new company as well, turnover in their department. We've set up weekly meetings and weekly walkthroughs so that we're in the building. The new person who is their district representative for us is then instructed to meet with principals, walk buildings with principals. So we have our custodial is managed by our director of facilities. And so he continues to have those meetings, but that's the expectation. We continue to monitor, and now that they do have a new person in, we feel it's getting a little bit better.
When can we expect feedback on that to see that it is getting better?
We can get feedback. Matt, how often do you do those surveys?
That's gonna come through. We'll do it. We just did a recent survey, so we can get you those results, and then we'll do it again in May.
Anybody else? I have a couple quick questions.
Scott has a question.
You don't mind, sorry. I'm curious about slide 4, where you mentioned that the criteria for the behavior outcome grid would be, has changed. Do you mind elaborating on that? For that?
Yeah, so that grid has changed to focus more on ready-to-learn skills as well as social emotional supports, behavioral supports, so that students can be more successful in accessing general education curriculum and in academic instruction. And so we've kind of shifted to those skills, where before it was all skills all the time, you know, and so we've kind of focused in on those ready-to-learn skills and those behavior skills, which we saw those two skills, those two domains, if you will, were the ones that had the biggest impact on these kids who were integrated more into the general education.
On purchase of service, thank you for putting in the amps, because they're so small, as opposed to everything else. One of the indicators, I'd love to see a graph of the number of people that are going to POS over the years, because it's been shrinking dramatically over the years, which I see as a good sign, because that means that we're able to care for our own students. And so,
We can get that information for you in a Friday packet.
if you would, I just think that's a good sign.
I will point out that there is actually on page 2 of the report, a chart that shows POS numbers and percentages across the years.
The other thing, I was wondering, on slide 5, on the 2-year student retention, we're having these numbers drop. What happened when we went from a 2-year to 4-year at that? Did it change your retention?
From a 4-year to a 2-year.
From a 4-year to-
We went from a 4-year to a 2-year.
Like, have an answer. Yeah.
So with the transition from the full-day program to the half-day program only, negligible change in student retention. If you look at South Tech's data as a fully 2-year program, I mean, we're expecting to have similar results to what we see at South, where every student that's coming there is coming there with the purpose of pursuing career and technical education. Whereas with the full-day program, career and technical education wasn't always the primary objective of every student walking in the door. So we're really banking on that trend line getting back to those pre-COVID numbers and us hitting that target for 2-year retention.
Any other questions? Yeah, last and not least, technology and five-year plan update presentation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Dr. Cuneo, Vice President Patroff, Directors of the Board of Education, Dr. Keenan. I'm Doug Austin, Chief Technology Officer. I'd like to spend some time to give you an update on our five-year plan tonight. Point out our mission statement here. I don't want to read the whole thing, but we're here to support all the departments and all of the educators in helping students achieve success and reaching their highest potential. So what I want to present tonight is kind of look at how we organize our work and how we are breaking down our plan over the next 5 years to provide those supports. So we generally operate with a philosophy of working on a model called OEI, which is operate, expand, and innovate. So the operate portion is the bulk of what we do. It's keeping everything running, it's keeping everything up to date, it's making sure everything functions properly. It is trying to increase capacity, expand programs, expand technology where appropriate. And then innovate is where we try to introduce new technology or new policies or new procedures that will hopefully transform education. So most of our energy and time is spent on the operate portion of this. So this pie chart here indicates the hours spent on tasks that are related to keeping everything running. So the vast majority of it is calling it technology operations. These are day-to-day tasks of all of our staff members doing their regular jobs, whether it's working on networks, working on computers, working our services. Customer service is the next portion here. It's actually the bulk of what we do, and that's really directly customer-facing tasks that we do, whether that be someone comes up with a problem or asks us for installation of software, asks us for new hardware. Anytime that's directly customer-facing, we tag that as customer service, we track that. And then the final portion of that are projects. Generally, our projects in operate area deal with upgrades, replacing hardware, replacing systems in order to keep them properly maintained. One of the primary things that fall under the operate category as far as what we do is information security. So the current situation is that the bulk of cyber attacks that are occurring by industry are being targeted towards education currently. The chart here shows where education and research that includes K through 12 and universities are the largest targeted industry right now for cybersecurity threats. And then one of the primary reasons why K through 12 education is such a big target right now is because of the value of the data that we have. So data is stolen from all kinds of organizations throughout the world, and it's actually a commodity that's sold on the dark web. So a recent Experian report indicated that full, complete student identifiable information packets can be sold for up to $1,000 a packet on the dark web. So with, about 28,000 students, 24,000 or 5,000 active students that are being assessed or diagnosed or applying, and then students that are exiting out but still in our system, we have about a $28 million target that represents what could be gained if that data was compromised from our system. So that's kind of a big focus area. So right now, under our current plan, I've laid this out in previous presentations, security is a big focus, adding security controls, adding security processes, and this year we've added third-party security monitoring. This is a service that monitors anything that's a technology asset that's associated with us by name or by what's physically accessible from the web on our systems. They also monitor our key vendors and give us a report of breaches and security issues with anything that they find on assets that we own, anything that they find on assets for our key vendors. And we work through that to try to mitigate any issues for that. We've also invested more heavily in some security controls for our internet and online resources, and we're moving away from our previous mail filter to a new mail filter this year that hopefully will provide us with better and more secure email communications than our previous vendor was able to provide. And then we're also migrating to a more comprehensive endpoint protection system that on all devices that basically look for those more advanced threats that are cropping up and going after school districts. Next slide. Under expand, again, we're trying to do things for expanding things. One of the things that, one of the goals I have that I've been working on is trying to move us to centralized purchasing and standardization of technology. In previous years, each department had their own technology budget and their own objectives and cycles that they manage, and so I'm consolidating that and trying to manage that in a more enterprise fashion to make sure that it's equitable and we have the correct resources that are needed to provide the education our students deserve. So over the next several years, I'm expanding this program. One of the ways that I'm handling that is by moving to a leasing model as opposed to a direct outright purchase. So over the next several years, I have laid out here, starting with this fiscal year, we leased all of the devices that we would normally have purchased directly and replace those devices on the schedule. And as we go through each year, that's going to expand. Around FY26 and FY27, we're going to kind of level out at the maximum number of devices. And based on my projections, as long as we don't see a significant increase in staff or student counts, it'll be around 12,000 devices or so, about 11,500, 12,000 devices that we will be managing through this lease. A big bulk of that will be we added devices for our paraprofessional staff, which previously didn't get devices assigned directly to them in 21 and 22 fiscal years, so those will get replaced around 2026. And we also went to a one-to-one with devices for students in the classroom. Again, those around 2025, 2026, we'll start replacing those devices. Another thing that we're doing for expanding is, Dr. Bolton has mentioned data reporting dashboards and things like that. We've been building those for various departments and working to expand the ability for us to visualize and give data to the departments for what they need so they can make data-driven decisions. The innovate portion is where we're looking to try to do things that are outside of our norm, outside of our normal operating, not just expanding capacity. So a couple of things that we're working on is eliminating or alleviating as many manual processes with automated processes. This year we'll be rolling out a online application for our homebound department. So previously our homebound department used a combination of electronic fillable forms and paper forms that were faxed in for students that were applying for, or partners that were applying for students to gain homebound services. Once this launches in January, all this will be online and it'll all be tracked and managed through an online application rather than having to receive faxes and receive paper and go through folders. Those are just one example of processes that we're putting in place to try to automate and make things a little bit more streamlined so that services are more readily available to our community. Data sharing and privacy, Dr. Bolton also mentioned, we're working with a grant from the Ed5 Foundation, from the Michael Dell Foundation, to build what's called an operational data store that will contain data, not just from all of our different systems, but systems that are contained in partnership about our students, so that we could have a full picture and alleviate a lot of teacher workload. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing an IEP right now because teachers have to live in the environment of the partner district and all the data that's collected there, and then all the specific data that is related to the goals that they have set on their IEP. So trying to build that into a comprehensive student dashboard that any member of the IEP team could look at and get a good glimpse of where the student is now, where they have been, and where they're going to go. It will be a transformative process for us. And then the last thing I want to mention is in order to support the remote learning, when we had to go to remote learning for COVID, we were providing internet access to some of our families in the home. That was very focused on providing access to online resources that we had for our district. And so I've been working with our Director of Equity and Inclusion, Dr. Backlund, about changing the paradigm of how we handle these devices and remote access for students and internet access for families. And so over the next several years, next year, we're working on a project where we're going to look at ways that we can change the way that we go about this so that we are providing internet access to students to alleviate this gap between students that have internet access at home and not having internet access at home, independently of whether or not we're providing remote learning. So resources and additional staffing, the major staffing request that I'll be making in this part of this plan is a dedicated security analyst. Is a recognized industry best practice to have a dedicated staff. Currently, the responsibility is held by the engineers and the administrators who are responsible for maintaining the systems, but it's always a better practice to have someone that kind of oversees the security outside of that to make sure that security guidelines are being followed and best security practices are in place, and also to provide all the monitoring on the security that we're doing in additional security control. In addition to that, other staffing, Dr. Ken and I have been talking about doing a organizational study, very similar to what was done for the Office of Employee Success and Engagement. Starting late fiscal year 24 and then into fiscal year 25, we hope to be building a operational study in my department and look for ways that we can improve the organization, structure, and staffing to modernize and make sure that we're in line with the best practices in the industry. Are there any questions?
Questions?
Just so the security analyst, we only need one person for that, or is that a department?
Well, I'd like to start with one, and then per the organizational study, we'll see if the recommendations for a larger commitment and that would be adequate and appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, would someone like to make a motion for the approval of the consensual items?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, excellent. Board education business. Okay, the excellent. Right. Can I have a roll? I need a motion to vote on a roll call meeting, or the vote on a closed meeting of the board on December 13th, 2022 at 7 p.m. I want to finish this meeting, and on Tuesday, January 10th, at 7 p.m.
Okay.
I need a roll call.
Dr. Esner?
Yes.
Dr. Byers?
Yes.
Director Mueller?
Yes.
Dr. Faulkner?
Yes.
Dr. Hudson?
Yes.
Vice President Potro?
Yes.
And President Quinn?
Yes. All right, I have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meetings.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. I was just looking for a motion for closed meeting. There we are. Okay, the following items were approved during the executive meeting on November 15, 2022. Employment resignations, retirement, salary adjustments, and extra duty pay, 1 contract release request, and 3 settlements. Board communications, anyone? Calendar of events, people can read. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?